And this is why I wish I wasn't the only woman directing a musical on Broadway this season. There are so many women who are ready to go. There are so many artists of color who are ready to go. And we need to see that racial diversity and gender diversity reflected in our critical establishment too.
Hey Theater 291, welcome to the underworld. We've been expecting you. Today, we are talking about Rachel Chavkin, one of only 5 women who have ever won the Tony Award for Best Direction of a Musical. She is known for an electrifying inventiveness that has also earned her 2 Obie Awards and countless other acclaims. Her directing has been described as experimental, diverse, provocative, visionary, and engaging. But before we dive into some of her most remarkable works and discuss her directing style and ideologies, let us take a peek into the background of this young theater icon. Rachel was born on the 20th of July, 1980 in Washington, D.C. She's the only child of 2 Jewish civil rights lawyers.
Actually think it would be criminal, maybe not prosecutorial.
Her father regularly took her to the theater as a child. As a result, she started attending theater camp at as early as 11 years old. Later, she would receive her BFA from New York University and her MFA from Columbia University. She worked as a teaching assistant while earning her master's degree and fell in love with teaching theater direction.
If you were ever offered the chance to teach anything, to teach art at any level, including elementary school, I would suggest taking it, and I very rarely give advice.
But ultimately, she decided to focus on practicing her craft. She has since freelance directed several internationally renowned musicals. Her constant occupation, however, is being the founding artistic director for The Team, an experimental theater ensemble that, quote, devises shows that tackle the experience of living in America today. The company has been around since 2004 and has staged 12 plays, many of which were award-winning and internationally touring. Rachel married Jake Heinrichs, the lighting designer of The Team, in 2011. While she definitely loves working with The Team, she is arguably best known for Hadestown. Hadestown is a folk operatic musical that retells the Greek myth of Eurydice and Orpheus. As summarized by Richard Schechner, in the original myth, Eurydice and Orpheus fall in love, marry, and then, for unclear reasons, a snake bites Eurydice. She dies instantly. Overcome with grief and driven by love, Orpheus descends to the underworld to recover Eurydice. Hades tells him, "You can have her if you don't look back to check if she's following you out." Orpheus obeys, but just before emerging into the light, he looks back, losing Eurydice forever. However, as Schechner also finds, the play Rachel created with musician Anais Mitchell is also a relatively feminist, racially diverse critique of neoliberalism. It is political, set in the Great Depression. Eurydice, who is driven to starvation by poverty, falls in love with Orpheus, who is a struggling musician. Since the chips are really down, Eurydice chooses to travel down to Hadestown, an industrial factory where the god of the underworld comforts his laborers by saying that within his prison walls, work shall never end. Therefore, they will never experience poverty. Let's take a closer look at this haunting play.
Hadestown is hardly an overnight sensation. Mitchell, a singer-songwriter, came up with the idea more than a dozen years ago.
I started writing it, in 2006. The piece began as a DIY community theater project in Vermont, where I used to live. We rolled around in a school bus that was painted silver, so we would tour around and present it as a concert.
Winter's night and summer's o'er, hear that high and lonesome sound.
In 2010, she first recorded Hadestown with musician friends Ani DeFranco and Justin Vernon of Bon Iver.
Hi,
Hi, I'm Rachel Chavkin. I'm the director of Hadestown.
And I'm Rachel Hauk. I'm the set designer of Hadestown.
And we're talking about the set of Hadestown.
The wait is nothing and the work is hard. It's a graveyard in Hadestown.
I would describe it as the best New Orleans hybrid bar music joint you could find. It's a hybrid between Preservation Hall and a Greek amphitheater. It's like the coziest, most intimate place to hear some music, and the story just takes over.
The thing that we both strongly agreed upon were actually the back walls. You think the show has begun in this bar, and actually you realize the whole time the bar was maybe in the bottom of an oil drum, like basically steel plating and rusted and awful.
When this world pulls apart, it feels like you've gone to the center of the earth or something. You are so far underground. And there's lots and lots of little things we did to make it feel that way. But mostly it's when the set moves, you just get kind of kicked in the chest by it. It's a beautiful moment.
Show the way the world can be. If you can do it, so can she.
Hadestown, the show, requires a weighted journey down to the underworld and a weighted journey back. It felt like the answer was a treadmill of some kind. Rachel's first impulse when we were at New York Theater Workshop was a circle. And I think that is very tied to the fact that we were telling an extremely ancient story. And circles are pretty old. Yeah. And thus we have a lot of turntables.
Young man, I was young once too. Sang a song of love like you.
There's these 5 guys in the air that, of course, figure very prominently in Wait For Me. It's actually this idea of the swinging lamps was the very first image that I ever shared with Aeneas for anything. I think you had this impulse that they would become the factory lights in Hadestown.
They are spun aluminum that was spun for the show. Every single element was made individually so that they could be used for the choreography, which developed as they were made.
I'm coming away from me. I hear the walls repeating.
This cage is custom made so that the dancers can do this. This is a handle here, so it's all made right? So it's all detailed.
As we descend into the underworld, may we gaze up at the night sky. After all, there'd be no Hadestown without Natasha, Pierre, and the Great Comet of 1812. It was after seeing a performance of this earlier Chavkin play that Aeneas decided to approach Rachel with Hadestown. This other Tony Awarded musical is, as Broadway.com sums up, about Natasha, a beautiful ingenue visiting Moscow while she waits for her beloved fiancé Andrei to return from the war. In a moment of indiscretion, she is seduced by the dashing, but already married, Anatole, and her position in society is ruined. Her only hope lies with Pierre, the lonely outsider whose love and compassion for Natasha may be the key to her redemption and to the renewal of his own soul. In terms of visual spectacle, the play is remarkable for transforming the theater into an opulent Russian salon, where, quote, every seat provides a unique perspective and an unforgettable experience.
I know a bunch of people have seen the show, but for those of you who haven't, the show is an adaptation of a small chunk of War and Peace, which might not strike you as Broadway material right off the bat. But it basically tells the story. It's a complicated, like Robert Altman-esque weaving of a lot of storylines and characters, but it basically tracks Natasha and Pierre and their 2 lives as they intersect in 19th century aristocrat Russia. It's a pretty incredible experience. It's a genre-bending kind of whirlwind that never comes up for air, and it's an incredible thing. And one of the best descriptions of it comes from Anthony Tomasini from the New York Times. And forgive me when I flatter you to your faces. But Mr. Malloy especially, the show lifts styles with such abandon, making willful shifts from punk riffs to agitated Broadway ballads, mock pompous recitative to gritty Russian folk songs, or drinking choruses with klezmer clarinets. You eventually lose track of what is being appropriated and you stop caring. So the result is almost like, it's a pastiche, like a Tarantino almost experience. So first question is for Dave. So you're the creator of the show. Sure. Thank you. I know you've told the story before, but how did you come up with the idea for a musical based on War and Peace?
It was really just upon reading the novel for the first time that, for whatever reason, this particular section immediately sang out to me.
Rachel and Dave Malloy have considerable history working together. They worked on the Obie awarded 3 Pianos years before Natasha opened in 2012, and Rachel also directed Dave's Moby Dick, which premiered in 2019. This is interesting since Paul Hustles, in his 1984 dissertation, states that it is rare for musical directors to work closely with librettists. Rachel seems like an exception since she practically became besties with Aeneas and has kept Dave as a constant collaborator. It makes you wonder if she approaches creative collaborations outside of theater the same way. Remind Me is the first film Rachel ever directed. This 15-minute short came out in 2019 and was inspired by Henrik Ibsen's play entitled A Dollhouse. It is about a woman trying to maintain her relationship with herself and her young children as her marriage breaks down. Unfortunately, even though it was an official selection of the Venice and Beverly Hills film festivals, I could not find any clips of the film. There are no substantive reviews of it either. But luckily, I was able to find the film pitch the writer Megan Ketch and Rachel made to raise funds for the project. Check it out.
Hi, my name is Megan Ketch. I'm an actor and a writer and producer. And I am here with the inspiring, acclaimed director and my dear friend, Rachel Chavkin.
And dear friend.
And we're here to talk to you about a short film that I'm producing called Remind Me. Remind Me is a 15-minute short film that we're going to shoot over 2 days in Los Angeles. And it is the inaugural production of a production company I co-founded with my writing and producing partner, Alan Petherick. This film, gently inspired by Ibsen's masterpiece, A Doll's House.
So beautiful.
So beautiful, is about a woman who I'm going to play, Nora, who is trying to stay connected to herself and her children as her marriage dissolves. Under the influence and reproached by her increasingly flustered husband, she attempts therapy, but ultimately she finds her voice in a goodbye letter. The thing that excites me so much about this project is the extraordinary group of artists that we've assembled to tell the story. It's also a story that resonates deeply with my experience.
I was going to say that's the most exciting to me as one of those artists is how personal this story is to you, and thus how beautifully specific the rendering of this character portrait is of this woman and this marriage. And it's a marriage we've talked a lot about, but how loving it is trying to be.
The fight.
Yeah.
Yeah, the fight to stay in love and out of blame. In love and out of guilt. In love and out of resentment. Which I think is an extraordinary fight in any human life, but one that deeply resonates with female identity and honors it in this film. So anyways, we want to invite you to help us raise the barn around this project, and we can't wait to share it with you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Apparently, in all the great works we have discussed, Rachel worked closely with the writers, and though she has been described as, quote, loyal to her collaborators, this is not true for sentimentality's sake.
And so fundamentally, it's really important to work with people who, yes, are very good at their job, but equally whose taste you trust. And those are the people who I come back to again and again.
The quality of collaboration is not the only common thread shared by these projects, though. One of the things Rachel is known for is her interest in working with different media and art forms. As you have seen, Hadestown began as a group of songs with, quote, little narrative impact. It took years of dramaturgical collaboration for it to be transformed into a musical. Natasha was inspired by a Leo Tolstoy novel that he insisted was not actually a novel, since the work also contains large sections of philosophical discussion. And, ironically, Rachel's first film was the only project discussed today that is actually inspired by a play. Rachel loves this kind of challenge. Actually, according to an article in American Theater, when she staged Meg Mirojnick's The Fairy Tale Lives of Russian Girls, she included a live female punk band. and her work with the team routinely blends text, video, and pervasive sound design. Another trait that characterizes her work is progressiveness. Rachel actively demonstrates that the personal is political and the political is personal. In all three works discussed, she consistently had a racially diverse cast and tackled gender issues. Additionally, in Hadestown, she did not shy away from critiquing capitalism, and in Natasha, she confronted war. Her experimentation and her strong convictions are likely among the reasons many writers have described her as fearless. If you're already hooked, have no fear too, since we're just getting started on discussing her directing style and ideologies. Through Joe Deer's 5 Phases of Creating a Musical and some talking points from Paul Hustle's aforementioned dissertation, we will delineate Rachel's process and taste as a director and get to know her personal standards and guiding principles. According to Joe Deer, the 5 phases of creating a musical are conception, collaboration, rehearsal, production, and performance. It should be no surprise that Rachel's attitude towards these things are best typified by her work in her own theater company, The Team, especially when it comes to the first 3 phases.
So the team tends to start with like an overall investigation. We spent a huge time doing research, interviewing people. So there's no like specific shape. It's always just about identifying what the problem is or challenge is in a given moment, which could be we need characters, and then structuring an assignment that will try to address that challenge. Rehearsal process for me means working on and refining like an agreed upon set of things that are going to happen, which could be the dialogue that's going to get spoken or the staging, storytelling.
Among the things that make The Team unconventional is its highly egalitarian creative process, and this represents Rachel's approach as a director very well in that she has repeatedly made clear how aware she is that a director should primarily only give structure and pointers. As Hustle states, the generic approach to musical theater direction is marked by collaboration. The director does not impose his vision upon the work, but is infused with the vision of the work, of which he is only one part. Perhaps he is first among equals, but his responsibility lies in his ability to compromise and persuade rather than in his proclivity to dictate.
Everyone's researching
Yes.
because everyone's a writer
Yeah.
with the team. And it's a truly horizontal writing process as much as I am the artistic director, and so certainly shaping the day-to-day doing.
One of the things that makes Rachel stand out, especially in terms of production, is her pacing of the process and the storytelling itself. According to Hustles, pace can be defined as the correct rhythm for the show regardless of genre. In the musical, this correctness will often be dictated by the score, and music, as written by the composer and interpreted in performance by the conductor, governs all matters of timing.
This is something that one of my teachers in grad school always told me, is that and he said it very lovingly, I should say, very beloved teacher, Brian Kulick. But Brian often said that I had trouble sometimes seeing the forest through the trees. And maybe that's a male-female thing. I sometimes think it is. But if you know the image of the forest through the trees, right? A tree is such a beautiful thing to stare up close at that sometimes you can forget that there's like a whole fucking forest. And so, and Brian said I made the most beautiful trees, amongst the most beautiful trees he'd seen, which I think meant one beat to the next was so beautifully cared for, but like sometimes you just have to go faster. I think all that style is just taste. We'll get back to that. But so what I'm telling you is that's my taste. Is I really love slowness and I love a tree. Maybe this is why I'm good at musicals, is because the forest tends to be taken care of because a composer sets time.
When it comes to the topic of character, Hustle says real life must be once inflated to provide for the anti-realism of dramatic song. This is in line with some principles Rachel has in terms of performance and collaboration.
What I primarily say is right at the outset on day one with the cast is to be clear that I am interested in them bringing their whole self, as much as they wish to bring into the room. And what I am trying to signal in saying that, and I will then sometimes unpack this directly, is your points of reference.
Going into Rachel's less specific directing tendencies and more into general guiding principles, let's recount what Hustles has to say about thought in musicals. He wrote that, in general, musical theater is not about things or ideas. It is about people. These people are emotional and sentimental, and they seek an emotional and sentimental bond with the audience. The director should never underestimate their power to do just that. Though Rachel loves the intellectual side of creative work, one of her most encompassing guiding principles when it comes to making choices as a director is emotion.
I find the intellectual quite moving, but many of my company members don't. They're much more gutturally led. And that's actually a very important friction with the team, is how a performer thinks versus how a director or dramaturg thinks. And so I give this question, what defines American capitalism specifically, and then they roll their eyes back in their head and hate me.
My taste is, what I am pursuing is to make something as visceral, or another way to think about this is as emotional as possible. So that basic goal governs every single one of my choices. And I genuinely am thinking, what hurts my heart more?
In addition, when asked how she thinks of directing text, Rachel says she has 4 major points she keeps in mind.
The play script, I personally think, this is number 1, does not mean anything until you, the director, decide what it means. That's number 1. The text doesn't mean anything until you decide what it means. Now, obviously, as I said, keep in mind the old axiom, to a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? I'm a director. I'm for the purposes of this class, everything's going to look like the director's job. Secret, obviously, is that actors, you can equally decide that the play means nothing until you as the actor decide what it means. And I'm sure every writer out there is screaming, I fucking decided what it means when I wrote it. That's all good. We're saying the director. Number 2, rule, always is the case. Number 2, the more choices you make equals the more specific the work becomes. I'm going to say that again. The more choices you make equals the more specific the work becomes. Number 3, every single choice you make, and again, I'm going to talk about what choices are in a moment, every single choice you make is going to lead immediately to at least 5 more choices that could be made. So let me pause and give an example. Let's say the first choice you made is you wanted to direct Young Jean's Lear. That's a choice. The next choice you make, let's say every choice with this idea of the choices branching, let's say we've decided to set Young Jean's Lear that we just wanted to have a floor. Okay, that's a big choice. What color is that floor? Is that floor wood? Do the actors make sound when they walk on that floor? Is the floor 8 by 8? Is the floor 10 by 10? Does the floor go all the way to the edges of the theater? That's 4 branches. And maybe the last choice is, does the floor stay the entire time, or does the floor go away at some point? I'm just making shit up. But to illustrate this idea that once you make a single choice, it immediately branches out into a ton of other choices. That rule, number 3, has the corollary. This is like 3A. You cannot, as a director, make a better choice until you make a choice. And the reason I say that is the number one thing that my students, when I was teaching, struggled with was just to begin making choices. And they might be overwhelmed by the multitude of choices that they could make. They might be struggling with the text analysis, so they couldn't even see what choices there were to make. So that's a lot of what we're going to be doing today. But fundamentally, you cannot make a better choice until you make a choice. And personally, I will say, I know now enough about myself to know that I have to stage a scene probably 2 to 4 times over the course of working on it before I like it. Before it is like here, hitting here in my sternum or in my gut. And again, I mean that literally. Like when I am watching a play in rehearsal or a musical in rehearsal, I'm just like sitting with, oh, sorry, that was me spreading my legs. I'm sitting with my legs spread, with like my chest forward, with my eyes, often with my jaw hanging open, because I am just trying to feel whether something is working or not. And again, every director is going to have their own whatever they're in pursuit of. The last rule, back to our rules, our 4 kind of truisms. Number 4, time equals the number of choices you get to make. So time could be the number of days or weeks you got to workshop that project. It could be the number of rehearsal hours you have. It could be whether you've been working with the playwright or composer for 5 years, or you just began working with them 6 months ago. It might be your tech time. It might be your number of previews. But fundamentally, time equals the number of choices you get to make.
Now that we're equipped with all of these guidelines, we ask, how do we know through the lens of Rachel Chavkin that a work of art is successful or finally successful? Lucky for us, she has readily given the answer.
For me, specificity is the highest goal I look for in others' work. And what is specificity? Specificity to me means only that human could have made that. And that human is obviously in the theater, that's a lie. It means that fusion of humans. So this writer mixed with this director mixed with these actors and designers only could produce that piece of work.
And that concludes our journey into getting to know director Rachel Chavkin. In this video, we took a peek into her biography. We even looked at some of her greatest works. Then we discussed some of her specific directing tendencies and then her general principles. I hope this journey was as mystifying for you as it was for me. Till next time, goodbye!